Welcome back to Silent Revenge Lab, the best channel for revenge stories. Imagine being 32 years old and realizing you're an orphan while both your parents are still breathing. My name is Cassidy Vance. 5 years ago, I was a successful junior architect in Chicago, living for the moments I could finally escape the city noise and head home to the smells of cinnamon and roasting turkey. But 3 days before Thanksgiving, my phone buzzed. It was my mother. I expected a grocery list or a debate over whether I was bringing the pumpkin pie. Instead, I got a sentence that felt like a physical blow to the chest. Cassidy, don't come home this year. Your sister, Savannah, is going through a hard time, and she specifically asked for you not to be there. She doesn't want the drama. The drama. That was their code word for my mere existence. I stood in my kitchen, frozen, holding a half-packed suitcase. No explanation. No, I'm sorry. Just a door slammed shut on 27 years of me trying to earn a seat at a table that was never meant for me. That year, I didn't have a family feast. I sat alone in a dimly lit bistro in downtown Chicago, picking at a plate of cold, dry turkey, watching happy families laugh through the window while the snow began to fall. I felt invisible. I felt erased. But as I sat there, fighting back tears that tasted like salt and failure, I had no idea that the couple at the table next to me, strangers who noticed my shaking hands, would become the family I'd spent a lifetime searching for. I had no idea that 5 years later, they would be the ones walking me down the aisle, while my biological parents stood outside the gates, uninvited and desperate, finally realizing that when you throw a child away, someone else might just pick them up and realize they're a diamond. Hold on, before we get into the real stuff, I want to know, what are you doing at this exact moment while hearing my voice? Are you driving? Cooking? Curled up in bed? I love seeing your answers down below in the comments, so let me know. Back to that night in Chicago. The woman at the next table, a vibrant lady with kind eyes named Evelyn, didn't just look at me with pity. She looked at me with recognition. She leaned over and said, "Honey, no one should eat Thanksgiving dinner with tears in their eyes. Join us." That single invitation was the first domino in a series of events that would lead to the ultimate revenge, a revenge not born out of malice, but out of total, cold replacement. You see, Savannah was the golden child. She was the one who needed protecting. But while my parents were busy protecting her feelings, they forgot they were losing the only daughter who actually cared about them. And by the time they realized their mistake, I was already calling someone else Mom. But the road from that lonely bistro to my wedding day wasn't a straight line. It was filled with betrayal, a secret inheritance, and a confrontation that would leave my father on his knees in the mud. Wait until you hear what my sister did the moment she found out I wasn't coming home. It wasn't just drama. It was a calculated move to erase me from the family entirely. The transition from daughter to stranger happened faster than I could process. As I sat with Evelyn and her husband, Marcus, at that bistro, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. It wasn't my mother calling to apologize. It was a string of text messages from Savannah. She didn't know I had been uninvited, or rather, she wanted to rub it in that she was the one who pulled the strings. One message read, "Finally, a Thanksgiving where I don't have to look at your perfect face. Stay in Chicago, Cassidy. Nobody missed you at the toast." That's when the realization hit me like a physical weight. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a coup. Savannah had spent years whispering in my mother's ear, painting me as the judgmental sister, the arrogant architect who looked down on her small-town life. In reality, I was the one paying off her credit card debts in secret so my parents wouldn't find out she'd lost another job. Evelyn noticed me staring at my phone, my knuckles white. She didn't pry, but she did something my own mother hadn't done in a decade. She reached out and placed her hand over mine. "The family you're born with is just a draft," she whispered. "The family you choose is the masterpiece." I spent the rest of that night talking to them. Marcus was a retired judge, and Evelyn ran a local nonprofit. They were warm, intellectual, and genuinely curious about my work. For the first time in my life, I wasn't being told to tone it down or don't make Savannah feel small. But while I was finding a glimmer of hope in Chicago, back in my hometown of Oak Creek, the narrative was being rewritten. My mother was telling our extended relatives that I was too busy for family, that I had chosen my career over my dying grandmother, who, mind you, was perfectly healthy and had no idea I'd been banned. The goal? My father's estate. You see, my father owned a massive plot of coastal land that had been in the Vance family for 3 generations. It was worth millions. And Savannah, who had never worked a day in her life, decided that if she could isolate me, she could ensure the inheritance was hers alone. She wasn't just stealing a holiday, she was stealing my future. I didn't know the extent of the betrayal until 2 weeks later, when I received a legal notice in the mail. It was a waiver of interest. My father was asking me to sign away my rights to the family land, to simplify the estate planning for Savannah's sake. The audacity made my blood turn to ice. I called my father, expecting him to be the voice of reason. I said, "Dad, you're essentially disinheriting me. Why?" His voice was cold, distant, as if he were talking to a telemarketer. "Cassidy, you have a high-paying job. You're fine. Savannah needs the security. Besides, after the way you ghosted us on Thanksgiving, we realized where your priorities lie. Don't make this difficult." I hung up the phone without signing. They wanted a villain? I was about to give them a masterpiece. I realized that if I played their game, I'd lose. I needed a new strategy. I needed to stop being the daughter who begged for a seat and start being the woman who owned the whole building. But before I could even plan my next move, Savannah did something so cruel, it made the Thanksgiving snub look like a compliment. She didn't just want the money. She wanted to take away the one thing I had left of my childhood. Savannah's greed had no ceiling. It wasn't enough for her to have the land or the lion's share of the bank accounts. She wanted to erase any trace that I had ever been the favorite or even a loved member of that household. 2 days after my father's cold phone call, I received a notification from a delivery service. A single, battered cardboard box arrived at my apartment in Chicago. No note, no bubble wrap, just the remnants of my life before the age of 18. Inside were my high school diplomas, my childhood journals, and the hand-carved jewelry box my grandfather had made for me before he passed. The hinges on the jewelry box were snapped. It looked like it had been kicked across a room. I called my mother, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and heartbreak. "Mom, why is my stuff in a box on my porch? Why is Grandpa's box broken?" My mother sighed, that familiar sound of exhausted disappointment that she usually reserved for my outbursts. "Cassidy, Savannah is moving back into her old room, your old room. She needs the space for her studio. We told you to come get your things, but since you're so busy with your big city projects, we figured we'd just send them to you." Savannah helped pack. You should be thanking her for the effort. "She broke my things, Mom," I said, the tears finally stinging my eyes. "Stop being dramatic," she snapped. "This is exactly why Savannah didn't want you at Thanksgiving. Everything is always a crisis with you. Just sign the estate waiver and let us have some peace." That was the moment the last string of loyalty snapped. I realized they weren't just choosing Savannah. They were actively trying to provoke me into acting like the villain they'd already decided I was. If I screamed, I was unstable. If I cried, I was manipulative. I took the broken jewelry box to a local restorer. While I was waiting in the shop, I ran into Marcus, the man from the bistro. He saw the box and the look on my face. Instead of offering a hollow "I'm sorry," he sat me down and asked a question that changed my entire perspective. "Cassidy, if they treat you like an investment they're ready to liquidate, why are you treating them like a family you need to save?" He was right. I was mourning a ghost. I decided then, and they're not to sign the waiver.
But I didn't tell them that.
I went silent. Total radio silence. I blocked Savannah, blocked my mother, and only left a channel open for my father's lawyer. I leaned into my work, pouring my frustration into a massive stadium design competition. 3 months later, I won. The commission came with a bonus that was more than my parents' entire yearly income. I didn't call home to tell them. Instead, I took that money and, with Marcus's legal advice, I made a move they never saw coming. I found out that the coastal land my father owned was actually subdivided into 3 parcels. One of those parcels, the one with the actual beach access, had been titled in a way that required my signature for any sale or transfer, thanks to a loophole in my grandmother's will that my father had overlooked. Savannah had already promised a developer she'd sell that land for a luxury resort the moment she got her hands on it. She was already shopping for a Porsche with money she didn't have. I wasn't going to sign the waiver. I was going to buy the debt on the other 2 parcels. But as I was preparing my counterstrike, I got a wedding invitation in the mail. Not mine, Savannah's. And the venue? It was the very beach she didn't technically own yet. She was planning her dream wedding on land I was about to seize. The wedding invitation was a masterpiece of passive aggression. It was printed on heavy, cream-colored cardstock with gold leaf, lavish, expensive, and paid for entirely by my father's dwindling retirement fund. The Vance family invites you to celebrate the union of their beloved daughter, Savannah, to Mr. Hunter Sterling. I wasn't listed as the maid of honor. I wasn't listed as a bridesmaid. In fact, I wasn't even mentioned. I was just another name on a mass mailing list, an afterthought sent to my Chicago address. But the real kicker? The location. It was the Vance Private Cove. My sister was planning to walk down the aisle on the very soil she was trying to swindle out from under me. I sat at my mahogany desk, the Chicago skyline shimmering outside my window, and I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the sound of a woman who had finally run out of empathy. Savannah had spent her whole life taking my clothes, my toys, and eventually my parents' affection. Now, she was trying to take my heritage to fund a wedding to a man I knew for a fact was a serial entrepreneur, which was just a fancy word for a professional grifter. I called Marcus. By now, he and Evelyn had become more than just friends from a bistro. They were my mentors. I'd started spending Sunday dinners at their home, experiencing the warmth of a family that didn't require me to audition for their love. Marcus, I said, looking at the gold leaf invitation. She's doing it. She's throwing $1 million party on land that's currently under a legal cloud. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his voice calm and steady. Cassidy, in the eyes of the law, your father cannot transfer that title to her without your signature on that waiver. And if he tries to use that land as collateral for the wedding loans he's clearly taking out, well, he's committing fraud. I don't want to send him to jail, I whispered. I just want them to see me, really see me. Then don't stop them, Marcus advised. Let them build the stage. Let them invite the guests. Let them spend every penny. The higher they build the tower, the louder it crashes. For the next 6 months, I became a ghost. My mother sent a few check-in texts, which were really just disguised requests for money. Cassidy, Savannah's dress is over budget. Since you're doing so well, it would be a nice gesture. I didn't reply. I didn't send a dime. I watched through social media as Savannah posted photos of cake tastings, floral arrangements that cost more than my first car, and save the date, videos filmed on our family beach. My parents looked radiant in the photos and significantly older. They were burning through their life savings to give the golden child a fairy tale, all while the daughter who actually loved them was being treated like a distant, bitter stranger. Then, 1 month before the wedding, the accident happened. I received a frantic call from my father. His voice wasn't cold anymore, it was panicked. Cassidy, thank God you picked up. There's a problem with the title. The bank won't release the final payment for the catering and the marquee. They say there's an encumbrance. You need to sign that waiver today. I've emailed it again. Just sign it, for your sister's sake. You don't want to ruin her wedding, do you? I looked at the document on my screen. This was the moment. He wasn't asking how I was. He wasn't apologizing for Thanksgiving. He was asking me to sign my life away so my sister could have a better party. I'll take care of it, Dad. I said quietly. I did take care of it. But I didn't sign the waiver. Instead, I made a phone call to a commercial real estate developer I had worked with on the Chicago Stadium project. I knew they were looking for a flagship location for a new boutique hotel chain. I told them I had a lead on a prime piece of coastal property, one that was about to go into a forced sale because the primary owner had defaulted on a series of predatory private loans he'd taken out to fund a wedding. But as the day of Savannah's wedding approached, something else was happening in my life. I had met someone, a man named Julian, who saw me not as a drama-filled daughter, but as a brilliant, resilient woman. When he proposed, I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell Savannah. Instead, I started planning a wedding of my own, for the exact same weekend. The timing was poetic, almost surgical. While Savannah was busy arguing over the shade of white for her napkins, I was scouting a location that would make our family beach look like a sandbox. With Julian by my side and Marcus and Evelyn acting as my unofficial wedding planners, I chose a cliffside estate in Newport. It was grand, timeless, and most importantly, completely out of my parents' league. I had spent years being the reliable one, the daughter who stayed in the background so Savannah could shine. But as the legal walls began to close in on my father's estate, I realized that playing nice was just a slow way to lose. I received a frantic email from my mother. Cassidy, why haven't you RSVP'd to your sister's wedding? And your father is saying the bank still hasn't cleared the title. Did you sign the papers? The florist needs their deposit, or they're pulling the orchids. I typed back a short, cryptic response. I'm busy preparing for a life-changing event that weekend. I'm sure you understand how important it is to focus on family milestones. She took that to mean I was coming. She thought I was finally falling in line. In reality, I was finalizing the purchase of the debt my father had foolishly taken out from a private lender to cover Savannah's $80,000 floral budget. Because my father had used the land as collateral, land he didn't fully own the rights to transfer, the lender was in a panic. I stepped in through a shell company, Vance Legacy Holdings, and bought the note. I now effectively owned the debt on my parents' home and the land Savannah was planning to get married on. Julian asked me one night as we looked over the guest list for our Newport ceremony, Cassidy, are you sure you want to go through with this? You're essentially nuking the bridge. Julian, I said, leaning my head on his shoulder. They burned the bridge 5 years ago when they told me not to come home for Thanksgiving. I'm just clearing away the rubble. The contrast between the two weddings was staggering. Savannah's was a frantic mess of unpaid vendors and family tension. Mine was a serene, high-end celebration of a new beginning. But I had one final card to play regarding their guest list. Most of our extended family, the aunts, uncles, and cousins who had been fed lies about my arrogance, received a second invitation in the mail. It was for my wedding. It included a paid travel voucher and a stay at the Newport estate. On the back of the invitation was a simple, handwritten note from me. I'd love for you to see the life I've built. The truth is waiting for you in Newport. The whispers started immediately. My phone began to blow up with calls from confused relatives. Cassidy, you're getting married the same day as Savannah? In Newport? Your mother said you were struggling. I'm not struggling. I told my Aunt Martha, the family gossip. I'm thriving, and I'm finally surrounded by people who want me there. Word got back to my mother within 48 hours. The explosion was nuclear. She didn't call. She drove 3 hours to my office in Chicago. She bypassed the receptionist and burst into my meeting room, red-faced and trembling with a copy of my invitation in her hand. How dare you, she shrieked. How dare you try to steal your sister's thunder? You are a spiteful, jealous girl, Cassidy. You're trying to sabotage her big day because you can't stand that she's the one getting married. I looked up from my blueprints. My voice is cold as the Atlantic in February. Actually, Mom, I'm getting married because I found someone who loves me. And as for the date, well, it's a free country. Besides, you told me 5 years ago that I wasn't wanted at family gatherings because I caused drama. I'm just making sure there's no drama at your house by staying far, far away. You cancel this, she demanded. You cancel this or you are dead to this family. I've been dead to you for 5 years, I replied, standing up. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a wedding to pay for. Speaking of paying for things, you might want to check with Dad about the beach house. I hear the new owners are planning to start construction very soon. The look of pure, unadulterated confusion on her face was almost worth the 5 years of heartache. She had no idea that her reliable daughter was now her landlord. But the real shock was yet to come. Because while my mother was screaming at me in Chicago, Savannah was about to find out that her perfect fiancé, Hunter, had a secret of his own. One that involved my father's remaining savings and a one-way ticket to Belize. The silence in my office after my mother stormed out was deafening. She had left a trail of expensive perfume and toxic entitlement behind, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to chase after her and apologize for existing. I felt light. But while I was focused on my upcoming nuptials, the Vance private cove was beginning to crumble. My sister's fiancé, Hunter Sterling, was a man of many faces, all of them polished and fake. I had done a little digging, not out of spite, but out of professional curiosity. As an architect, I deal with developers and contracts. I know how to spot a paper tiger. Hunter had convinced my father to invest the final $150,000 of his retirement fund into a revolutionary beachfront resort project. He told my father it would triple in value, providing enough wealth to take care of Savannah for life. My father, blinded by his desire to provide for his favorite child, had handed over the check without a second thought. The problem? The resort was being planned on the very land that I now technically controlled through the debt purchase. Hunter was selling a dream on property he didn't own to a man who didn't have the right to sell it. I received a frantic, whispered call from my father at 2 a.m. He sounded small. Cassidy, I need to know. That company, Vance Legacy Holdings, is that you? The bank said they're starting foreclosure proceedings on the house. They said the wedding marquee can't be set up on the beach because it's contested property. Hunter says it's just a clerical error, but he hasn't been answering my calls for 2 days. I sat up in bed, the Chicago skyline a blur of neon through the window. Dad, Hunter isn't answering because the money you gave him is likely already in an offshore account. And yes, I am the one holding the note on your house. There was a long, jagged silence on the other end. I heard his breath hitch. Why would you do this to us? We're your parents. And I was your daughter, I said, my voice steady. But you told me to stay away. You told me Savannah didn't want the drama of my presence. I simply took you at your word. I built a life where I didn't need you, and then I bought the life you were throwing away. Please, he choked out. The wedding is in 10 days. There are 300 people coming. The caterers won't unload the trucks until they're paid in cash. Your mother she's losing her mind. Then tell her to talk to Savannah, I replied. Maybe the golden child can pay for it. I hung up. I wasn't being cruel. I was being a mirror. For decades, I had been the one to fix the leaks, pay the bills, and smooth over the cracks. Now they were standing in a house of cards during a hurricane, and they were surprised they were getting wet. The next morning, the news broke in our small hometown. Hunter Sterling had vanished. He hadn't just taken my father's money. He had cleared out the wedding fund, account Savannah had been using. He left a note saying he couldn't handle the pressure of the Vance family expectations. Savannah was devastated, but not for the reason a normal person would be. She wasn't heartbroken over the man. She was hysterical because her social event of the year was turning into a public execution of her reputation. And that's when she did the unthinkable. She called me. Cassidy. She sobbed into the phone, her voice thick with fake contrition. I know we've had our issues, but we're sisters. I'm in trouble. The wedding is falling apart.
Hunter is gone.
Dad is sick with stress. You have to come home. You have to use your connections to fix the title issue and maybe you could loan us enough to cover the vendors? I'll pay you back, I swear. I looked at the wedding dress hanging in my bedroom, a stunning silk gown that Julian had helped me pick. Savannah, I said softly, I can't come home. I have a wedding to attend that weekend.
What?
Whose wedding? She snapped, the mask slipping. Mine, I said. And the best part? I didn't have to bribe my guests to show up. They're coming because they actually love me. I ended the call and blocked her number for the final time. But as the countdown to the big day began, a new player entered the game. My grandmother's lawyer reached out with a piece of information that made the beachland dispute look like child's play. It turns out, my parents had been hiding a secret about my birth that would change the legal standing of the entire Vance estate. The information my grandmother's lawyer, Mr. Sterling, no relation to the grifter, thankfully, dropped on my desk was enough to stop my heart. He didn't come with a bill. He came with an old, yellowed envelope that had been sealed for 32 years. "Cassidy," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of professional secrets. "Your grandmother knew the atmosphere in that house. She knew Savannah was the favorite, and she knew your parents were, let's say, fiscally irresponsible with the family legacy. But there's a reason your mother has always treated you like an outsider. And it's not just because you're successful." I opened the envelope. Inside was a birth certificate. Not mine, well, not the one I had grown up seeing. It was the original. It turns out, I wasn't just the unwanted daughter. I was the sole biological heir to my grandmother's separate fortune. The story my parents had told me, that I was the miracle baby born just before they struggled, was a lie. I was the daughter of my father's first wife, a woman who had passed away shortly after I was born. My mother was actually my stepmother, who had married my father and had Savannah shortly after. They had spent 3 decades hiding my mother's existence to ensure that the inheritance meant for her child, for me, would be pooled into the family pot to benefit Savannah. The "don't come home" call from 5 years ago wasn't just about Thanksgiving. It was because I was turning 27, the age my grandmother had set for me to receive the full disclosure of my mother's trust. They had blocked me, gaslit me, and pushed me away, hoping I'd never come back to claim what was legally mine. I felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over me. The revenge I had been planning was suddenly upgraded from a business move to a moral crusade. "What does this mean for the beach land, Mr. Sterling?" I asked, my fingers tracing the name of the mother I never knew. "It means," he said with a grim smile, "that your father never had the right to use that land as collateral. It was held in trust for you. Every penny he spent on Savannah's wedding, every loan he took out against that property, it's not just a civil matter. It's a massive breach of fiduciary duty. You could have them evicted tomorrow. You could have them charged." I sat back, the weight of the revelation sinking in. My parents hadn't just been choosing a sister. They had been stealing my identity and my mother's legacy to fund a lifestyle for a girl who wasn't even related to the woman who earned the money. Meanwhile, back in Oak Creek, the dream wedding was turning into a nightmare. With Hunter gone and the bank accounts frozen, my mother was desperately trying to pawn her jewelry to pay the tent company. She was calling my aunts and uncles, begging for loans, telling them I had stolen the family land through a legal trick. But the aunts and uncles weren't listening. They had received my Newport invitations. They had seen the travel vouchers. And they had started talking. One of my cousins called me, breathless. "Cassidy, your mom is telling everyone you're a criminal. She's saying you forged your father's signature to take the beach. She's planning to show up at your wedding in Newport to make a scene and reclaim what's hers." I smiled. It was the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. "Let her come," I said. "In fact, I'll make sure the security guards have her name at the very top of the list." I spent the next week finalizing 2 things: my wedding vows to Julian and a set of legal papers that would be served the moment I said, "I do." I wasn't going to ruin Savannah's wedding day. I didn't have to. It was already a smoking ruin. Instead, I was going to use my wedding day to celebrate my real family, the one I chose and the one that had been hidden from me. But as the day arrived, a surprise guest showed up at the Newport estate before the ceremony even started. It wasn't my mother. It was my father. And he wasn't there to fight. He was there to beg. My father stood at the iron gates of the Newport estate, looking like a man who had aged 20 years in a single week. He wasn't wearing the expensive suit he'd bought for Savannah's wedding. He was in a wrinkled windbreaker, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. Behind him, the Atlantic crashed against the cliffs, a roar that mirrored the chaos I knew was happening back in Oak Creek. I met him at the gate. I didn't invite him in. I didn't offer him water. I just stood there in my silk robe, the morning sun catching the diamond on my finger, the ring Julian gave me, bought with honest love, not stolen inheritance. "Cassidy," he rasped, his voice breaking. I know you found out about your mother, about the trust. Is that why you're here, Dad? To apologize for 30 years of lying? Or are you here because the bank finally put the foreclosure sign in the front yard?" He reached out a trembling hand, but I stepped back. The silence between us was a canyon. "Savannah is a mess," he whispered. "She's locked herself in her room. The vendors are taking the chairs back. Your mother is, she's blaming me for everything. She says if I had just handled you better, we wouldn't be losing the house." Handle me? I let out a sharp, cold laugh. I wasn't a problem to be handled. I was your daughter. I was the one who sent you money when Savannah lost her rent. I was the one who worked 80-hour weeks while you were busy pretending my mother never existed. "We just wanted a peaceful family, Cassidy," he pleaded. "Your mother, my wife, she couldn't look at you without seeing the woman I loved before her. She was jealous. She wanted Savannah to have everything so she could feel like she won. I just went along with it to keep the peace." "You bought your peace with my life," I said. "And now the bill is due." He fell to his knees on the gravel driveway. It was a pathetic sight. This was the man I used to think was a giant.
Please, just sign the release for the beach land.
"If you do that, the bank will give me an extension. We can save the house. Your mother can keep her pride. I'll do anything. I'll tell everyone the truth." I looked down at him. For a second, a tiny part of me, the little girl who used to wait by the door for him to come home, wanted to reach out. But then I remembered that cold plate of turkey in the Chicago bistro. I remembered the broken hinges on my grandfather's jewelry box. "It's too late for pride, Dad," I said. "And it's definitely too late for the house."
I didn't just buy the debt.
I've already sold the land to a conservancy group. By next month, the Vance Private Cove will be a public park. No resorts, no private weddings, just a place where anyone can go, even people who aren't wanted at home. He looked up at me, his face twisting in horror. "You sold it? But that was Savannah's future." "No," I corrected him. "That was my mother's legacy, and now it belongs to everyone." I signaled to the security team, "Please escort him back to his car. He has a long drive back to a very empty house." As they led him away, he turned and shouted, "You'll be alone, Cassidy. When this wedding is over and the spite is gone, you'll have no one." I didn't bother responding. I turned back toward the house where Evelyn was waiting with a bouquet of peonies and Marcus was ready to walk me down the aisle. I wasn't alone. I was finally surrounded. But the drama wasn't over. My father might have come to beg, but my stepmother was currently in a car speeding toward Newport with a different plan. She wasn't coming to beg for the land. She was coming to destroy the one thing I had left, my reputation in front of my new family. The ceremony was supposed to be perfect. The Newport air was crisp, smelling of salt and expensive floral arrangements. 50 of my closest friends and the few relatives who had seen through my parents' lies were seated in the garden. Julian stood at the altar, looking at me with a pride that made my heart ache. Marcus was standing by my side, his arms steady as a rock. But just as the string quartet began the first notes of the processional, the heavy iron gates at the back of the estate didn't just open, they slammed. My stepmother, Brenda, didn't come in a car. She came in a whirlwind of fury. She had managed to talk her way past the front gate by claiming she was the mother of the bride and showing her ID. She was still wearing the dress she had bought for Savannah's canceled wedding, a garish, over-the-top gold number that looked desperate against the elegant backdrop of my day. "Stop this. Stop this right now," she screamed, her voice cutting through the music like a jagged blade. The music died. Guests turned, their faces a mask of shock. Julian took a step toward me, but I squeezed Marcus's arm, signaling him to stay put. I wasn't going to hide. Brenda marched down the aisle, her heels sinking into the expensive turf. She didn't look like a mother. She looked like a woman who had lost her grip on reality because she had finally lost her grip on my wallet. "You think you can just replace us?" she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at Marcus and Evelyn. "You think you can take our home, steal our land, and then play princess in Newport? This girl is a liar. She's a thief who turned her back on her own sister in her darkest hour." She turned to the crowd, her eyes wild. "She's using all of you. She's paying for this with money she stole from her father's business. She's a fraud." The silence that followed was heavy. I could see my Aunt Martha's jaw drop. I could see Julian's parents looking at me in confusion. This was it. This was the drama they had always accused me of. Brenda thought that by making a scene, she could shame me into giving her what she wanted. She thought her public meltdown would force me to by her silence. I took a deep breath. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stepped away from Marcus and walked slowly toward her. I waited until I was just inches away, so the guests could hear every word. "Brenda," I said, my voice low and dangerously calm. "You're right about one thing. I am replacing you."
But I didn't steal anything.
"I took back what you spent 30 years hiding from me. I have the bank records. I have the original birth certificate. And I have the signed affidavits from the vendors you tried to scam in Oak Creek." Her face went pale, the gold of her dress suddenly looking cheap and tattered. "You told me 5 years ago not to come home for Thanksgiving because Savannah didn't want the drama," I continued, loud enough for the back row to hear. "Well, look around. You brought the drama. You are the only person here who isn't wanted. You aren't the mother of the bride. You're just a woman who ran out of other people's money." I signaled to the 2 off-duty police officers I had hired for security. "She's trespassing. Please remove her. And if she sets foot on this property again, press charges for the full extent of the harassment." As the officers took her arms, Brenda began to wail. It wasn't a cry of grief. It was the sound of a woman realizing the golden child was now the child of a bankrupt family. "You'll regret this, Cassidy. You're nothing without the Vance name." "Good," I called out as they led her away. "Because from this moment on, my name is Cassidy Sterling Vance. I'm taking back my mother's name. You can keep yours. It's the only thing you have left that isn't in foreclosure." The gates shut behind her. The silence returned, but it wasn't awkward anymore. It was a vacuum waiting to be filled. I looked at Julian. He was smiling. I looked at my guests. They were standing. Aunt Martha was the first to start clapping. But as I turned to restart the music, I saw someone else standing at the back of the garden. Someone I hadn't seen in 5 years. Someone who looked exactly like the woman in the hidden birth certificate photos. The woman standing at the back of the garden looked like a ghost come to life. For a heartbeat, my breath hitched. I thought my mother had somehow returned from the grave. But as she stepped forward, I realized she was older. Her hair a sophisticated silver, her eyes a mirror image of my own. It was my Aunt Sarah, my biological mother's twin sister. She had been told by my father decades ago that I had died in the same accident that took her sister. My parents hadn't just stolen my money. They had severed my entire maternal bloodline to keep their secret safe. "I saw the announcement in the Chicago papers," she whispered, her voice trembling as she reached the front of the aisle. "I saw the name Vance and the face. I knew it couldn't be a coincidence. I came to see if the lie was finally over." I didn't need to say a word. I pulled her into a hug that bridged 30 years of silence. The revenge was complete, but the healing was just beginning. I turned back to Julian, took his hands, and we finished the ceremony. It wasn't just a wedding, it was a reclamation. When the officiant finally said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the roar of the crowd was louder than the Atlantic waves. So, what happened to the Golden family? Without my signature and without the trust money they'd been bleeding dry, the house in Oak Creek was seized by the bank. My father moved into a small, one-bedroom apartment, living off a tiny Social Security check. Savannah, the girl who didn't want drama, ended up working 2 jobs just to pay off the credit card debts Hunter Sterling left in her name. My stepmother, Brenda, tried to sue me for emotional distress, but the judge threw it out within 5 minutes, citing the decades of financial fraud she'd committed against me. They wanted me gone so they could have everything. In the end, they got exactly what they asked for, a life without me in it. And without me, they realized they had nothing at all. I spent my first Thanksgiving as a married woman at a long, crowded table. Marcus and Evelyn were there, Aunt Sarah was at my right hand, and Julian was at my left. There was no drama. There was only the sound of people who actually wanted to be there. I learned that you can't choose the people who share your blood, but you can absolutely choose the people who share your life. And sometimes, the best way to get even isn't to burn their house down. It's to build a much bigger one of your own and never give them the address. If you found this story of justice and new beginnings powerful, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel out. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to hear that they are worth more than their family's mistakes. For more stories of cold justice and emotional triumphs, click that subscribe button and join us here at Silent Revenge Lab. Turn on notifications so you never miss a reveal. What would you have done if your parents uninvited you from a holiday? Would you have bought their debt or just walked away? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one.